I was meditating about, well, what does that mean to awaken the spiritual heart as opposed to, the insight training, which is I really love and which was foundational and transformational for me in my own life and my own awakening. I remember the early trainings were the awakening heart and the opening heart. And so as I reflected on that, I said, well, how would I understand the difference between awakening the heart and awakening the spiritual heart, or awakening to the spiritual heart? And what came to me was this idea. First of all, I understood it like this, that when we come into this world as an individuation of God, or an individuation of the Spirit, which commonly and classically we call the soul, we come into this world as a particularization of the infinite consciousness. And then we somehow have to interface with this substantiality of the flesh and learn to move it and learn to identify with it and learn to enter in this extraordinary pretense that we are this. And I say an extraordinary pretense because I think one of the great miracles of God is that God is able to forget that God is God and allow us to have our crazy stories that play out in this world. And then as thousands of people have had near-death experiences relate, then suddenly they're up above their body, looking at their body, and realize that none of it was them. And all the things that mattered so much didn't matter at all. And what really was important was this incredible feeling of freedom they had. And their attachment to the world and their attachment to all their issues just went away. And then it wasn't their time to be done with this illusion of form, so they were returned into the body, but always with a sense of regret at coming back and a new sense of freedom and relationship to life. So in many ways, I think my experience of insight gave me that when I really had that opening heart, it allowed me to be in my world with all the drama of the life I was in, with a different level of neutrality and objectivity that I got from getting into that greater heart. So for me, when I looked at what happened to me as an individual, is that I learned, and in reference to the heart, I thought, well, what I really learned, I had to learn to do to be here as a person and to be in the little story of me, is I had to learn to be me. And so me is that separate individuation, that separate self, that I had to figure out how to play that out as if that was all there was. And I can remember as a child that was difficult because I kept having experiences of being in something that was so much more. But nobody around me seemed to know that. So gradually, to fit in, to feel like I belonged, I gave up that other awareness to do the little me. And so I really reference the me as very much connected to the physical heart. Because one of the things that I was after in creating a sense of me was to create a sense of stability. That for me to exist in this world, in the game of this world, what the Hindus call the Maya of this world, I had to get identified with me as this separate being. And so what that gave me was a sense of stability, a sense of here-ness. And I relate that to the physical heart. And that gave me a great comfort relative to the world I was in, because suddenly I fit in. And I'm sure every one of us has gone through this, because I think this is a universal process that we do when we come into this world. However, I found that within me there was a kind of an ache that I never lost as I came into that me, because there was always a kind of a loneliness. And then with the onset of puberty, that loneliness became more of a drive to move beyond that sense of me in a more tangible way. But even before then it was because I wanted to have friends. And I did have friends. And what I did is I had groups that I would identify with. And this would be my family first, and then my best friends in the neighborhood, and then my sports team friends, and eventually that was the girls in my life. But all these things, and there was a comfort that came to me. And that to me was when the me became a we. And so my escape from me was to get into we. And in we, I was still in identification, but because there was more inclusion of others, I somehow had some relief from this pain I had in playing this separate game. And I really looked at that movement into the we as connected to what we call the psychic heart, or the chakra, the heart chakra, that the Hindus talk about and the metaphysicians talk about, as this psychic emotional bridge into a collective we. And so for me, that was really comforting to me for myself, up until I was about 17 years old. And all along I was having these experiences that I couldn't explain, but I couldn't talk to anybody about it, except where I was suddenly in very different places of consciousness. But at 17, I had two things happen. One, I read a book called Siddhartha, and knew that I had lived before. And then I had my own near-death experience when I rolled my car at 75 miles an hour. And in the midst of the car tumbling, knew I was going to die, but somehow came back alive. And suddenly the we wasn't enough. And I was tortured by this isn't enough. And so for me it became a movement of having to find some other level of awakening, of beyond the we, because the we, I was still suffering like I was all alone in the we. And then through process of years of searching and going to many teachers and gurus and Zen masters and trainings and dropping out of college 4 times and going out and living as an ascetic in the desert and dropping to 116 pounds, starving myself to death almost. But then I came into an experience at that time where I had a spiritual healing for a supposedly incurable condition, but in that I came into something else, which I relate to the next aspect of the heart, which is actually to the right of the center of the chest, which my teacher and the founder of Insight references the spiritual heart. And this one I relate to the quality of unity. The difference was there's a connection to not just the we of us, but the we of everyone. And there was a connection to all the beings, all the souls, all the other ones that were sharing this journey with me. And that was a great freedom for me. And I think that is, and I would have said that was the end game at that point. To me, that is, it was like a level of returning to who I was and who I am and what this is really about. But then having come to that place and then finding a path of growth and awareness, and that unity, when I meditated inside, I say, well, what's the quality of that unity? Because I could see that for the physical heart, I was getting stability, and for the emotional heart, I was getting community. But it was the unity, I realized that one of the qualities of that unity is it gave me a sense of continuity. And I didn't realize how important that was, because one of the great terrors of my life had always been this sense of finality, that why invest in life, why work for anything when all the evidence of the world suggested that it didn't amount to anything, it didn't last. And so that all the efforts of my existence were always towards something that could never have permanence or a sustaining quality to it. But when I experienced this unity, I experienced the sense of the continuity of it, that it existed beyond this form and maybe existed forever. I couldn't know for sure, but I knew it existed to that. And then, through the process of my own growth and my own learning, through many seminars and many trainings and through a spiritual path, working with John Roger, who was the founder of Insight and my teacher, there came another level of realization of the spiritual heart, and I realized that there was a greater spiritual heart. And that spiritual heart wasn't in this space, it was actually around this space, and if anything, all of this was inside of it. And when I really came to the realization of it, I realized not only was all of this surrounded this body and these bodies, but all of this creation was inside it. And I realized it was meditating all this and holding all this and learning through all this. And then its quality was almost like as it in its way, as it inhaled and exhaled, all of this was and was not. And that all existence, all reality, all things were in the spiritual heart. And that in that realization, there was a realization that we are also that too. And that progressively, the intent of all this, the purpose of all this, which is what I was always looking for, was that God wanted to know itself. So God created out of itself all of this, and then God put itself in all this to experience all this, to then come into remembrance of all that it was and all that it had done. And the quality of this that I realized was the greater spiritual heart was that it was infinite and that it was eternal, which meant it was beyond time and space. So, to me, if I could have anything and ask for that, anything for anybody I knew, it would be to come awake to that is infinite and eternal. And that doesn't devalue us coming awake to the next thing that makes our life better. I just knew from my own process of living, there has been an endless discontent with anything that where I was left with the impermanence of it, where it didn't have a perpetualness, that didn't take me beyond the form of this. So that's my little idea about the spiritual heart. I'm sharing all that not because you need to understand it or believe it. It's just my take on it. But more than that, I think it's possible for us to know that and experience it. I will tell you in truth that I believe that all of us are, in a sense, victims of amnesia. That we are here and we have forgotten who we are. And that we go to seminars and we go to classes and we meditate and we pray and we sacrifice and we do all these things, but everything is our own way to try and remember, to come into the remembrance of who we are. And when we get there, we're going to realize we were always who we always were. And that we don't have to change and become and be different. One of the things I loved about Insight when I took it was I I understood something early on that was different than all the other things I'd seen. Everything else I had seen, the different trainings and groups I'd been to, and I'd been to a lot of them because I was pretty fanatical in my checking everything out I could find, was that in all the other groups, there was this message they were offering me which said, we can help you become who you really are, or become who you really want to be. And the thing I got very early on with insight was that I didn't have to become anything, that I already was who I needed to be. I just had to wake up to that.